Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to BioPharm's 6th webinar in our series of CTMS webinars. In today's webinar, we'll be focusing on the completion and approval of electronic trip reports. And in case you missed any of our previous webinars or you would like to watch them again, the recorded presentations are available for download from our website, www.biopharm.com. We've covered a variety of topics in our past webinars and have some interesting topics coming up as well in future months. And if you do have some ideas of topics that you'd like to see us present, please go ahead and send us an email, and at the end of the presentation you'll see my email address where you can send that. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Param Singh. I'm the Vice President of the Clinical Trial Management Solutions practice here at BioPharm Systems. I've been working in the health and life science industry since 1999 and have almost exclusively been working with Siebel Clinical during that time. Before joining BioPharm a little over 3.5 years ago, I was part of Accenture's pharma R&D practice and leading Siebel CTMS implementations there as well. And overall, I've been a part of about 15 implementations of Siebel Clinical now. And these vary from implementations for pharma, CRO, medical device companies, and also range from anywhere from 30 users to global implementations of over 4,500 users. And each type of and size of organization has its own approach to selecting implementing this solution. So here's today's agenda. We're going to start with a brief look at the components of site visit reports, which are called trip reports in Siebel. Then we're going to look at 4 common challenges associated with completing trip reports electronically. And for each challenge, we'll discuss the ways in which Siebel Clinical Vanilla and BioPharm's pre-configured Ascend version of Siebel Clinical address these challenges. And we're going to wrap up with a live demonstration of completing and approving an electronic trip report in Ascend. And then we'll have some time for questions. Before we do get started, I do want to point out a few features of the meeting platform that we're using. Right now we have everyone else on mute. So if you do have an issue, please click on the raise hand button on your screen, and we'll pause and we'll address the issue if you're having any. Also, for the question and answer portion, feel free to submit questions via the chat function on your screen. As we progress during the webinar, you can submit your questions at any time, and those questions will come directly to me, and I'll address them during the Q&A session. And if you would like to ask questions live, you can press, I think it's *7 to unmute your line, and then once the question's been asked, you can press *6 to mute your line again. I also want to remind everybody that we are recording this presentation, and we will post it on our website after today. Okay, let's get started. So first, like I said, we want to start out with basic typical components of trip reports. So, the first one here is the site visit information, just some basic information about the site and the site visit, the dates, and just relating it back to the sites and the PI and the attendees that are at the site. The next item is your checklist items, so questions or tasks that you need to do on the trip report. Your narrative questions, questions that require sort of descriptive answers, your follow-up items or issues that you encounter during monitoring at the site. And additionally, for monitoring visits, you're also going to be looking at subject enrollment statistics, monitored serious adverse events, monitored protocol deviations, and CRFs as well. So for all trip reports, you're going to look at the first 4 components, for initiation, for evaluation, for monitoring, and closeout. And then for monitoring and closeout visits, you'll also look at these these 4 sub-bullets that are listed below. And we'll look at each of these in a little bit more detail on the next few slides. So your site visit information on your trip report. This is basically your basic facts that need to be captured on the trip report about your site. So your protocol, your site number, your primary investigator, some dates as to when the visit occurred, when it ended, and possibly the names of the attendees at the site personnel that were present at the trip. And so these are just some background information or details about the site visit. Your next piece or your next component of your trip report is going to be your checklist items. So these are the specific tasks that need to be done during the visit, and that can be answered with a yes, no, or not applicable answer. And these are some of the examples of checklist items. And site staff training records are current. Your site regulatory binder is complete. You've captured informed consent for all the subjects that are on this particular site. So all of these are checklist items that basically the monitor is going to check off that whether these occurred or not. And as part of your business process or through custom configuration in your system, if a monitor is answering no to any one of these questions, you can actually enforce a further comment if a no answer is given to any one of these items. And this may be very similar to your site monitoring SOPs that are in place, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail and how it relates to your SOPs as well. The next component of your trip report may be narrative questions. So these are similar to your checklist questions, but they actually require a narrative or a descriptive answer from the monitor. So examples of these would be how would you describe the site's compliance with informed consent policy? How would you describe the site's compliance with drug accountability procedure? So these questions require a more narrative response by the monitor and are not simply just a checklist to go down. Next, you'll have follow-up items. So these are actions that a site must take, usually due to a finding during a site visit, but not always. So you can actually capture follow-up items or issues related to a site at any time, but during a site visit is when you follow up on what's happened or what actions have been taken and whether these follow-up items or issues have, have been closed. So some of these follow-up items may be that the sub-investigator requires training in a product handling, or we need to obtain CDA for a new staff nurse. We have no internet access available, and we require that for this particular study. So any issues or items that need to be captured and tracked through closure of these sites will be captured in this follow-up items section. So you'll need to track these from when we identify this issue through when we close out this issue and make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. And for monitoring visits, so monitoring and closeout visits, we'll also need to track these additional items. So the first thing is your enrollment statistics at the time of that site visit. So this is an important one where you track the numbers of screened, enrolled, completed, and discontinued patients at the time of that site visit. So you capture a true snapshot of the enrollment statistics at the time of the visit. Your serious adverse events, some organizations do like to monitor serious adverse events. How many serious adverse events have we monitored at the site, which subjects they're related to, some basic information about the serious adverse events that have occurred at the site during the trial. Protocol deviations, those are also something that certain clients want to pull into their trip reports as well. Basically, a protocol deviations log of any and all protocol deviations that have and violations that have happened on this particular site as it relates to either patients or site procedures. And then last but not least, monitored case report forms. So to be able to identify which CRFs, which CRF pages, and related to which visits and which subjects are monitored during each site visit. And these are some of the things that we'll want to capture in routine monitoring trip reports. So those are the four main components of our trip report. What I'd like to talk about now is some challenges. There are specific common challenges that we've seen our clients face when looking at electronic trip report tracking within a system. The first one is adhering to site visit SOPs. So how do we enable a site, or how do we enable a system, rather, to adhere to our company's SOPs as it pertains to site visits? The next one is capturing the snapshot in time for when the site visit occurred. Next is track and report throughout the review process. So as the trip reports are reviewed, how do we track through that process? And then finally, recording approvals for the trip report. In the next few slides, we're going to discuss how Siebel Clinical, Vanilla, and our Ascend configurations address each of these challenges, and then we'll walk through the demo itself. So the first thing is adherence to SOPs. So Siebel addresses the challenge of ensuring that trip reports adhere to their governing SOPs through template functionality. A template is like an outline, or basically a set of tasks that are standardized within the system that allows you to create a sort of blank form that monitors can fill out each time they visit a site. So within the system, the template for Siebel Clinical typically is set up to mirror your SOPs. And then the only way for a monitor to complete a trip report in Siebel is to use one of those templates. So you're enabling your SOPs within the system and allowing monitors to follow a standard process with the use of those templates. So this functionality ensures adherence to SOPs and consistency across all of your site visit reports. To demonstrate how a trip report template can be set up to mirror an SOP, here's a portion of a sample monitoring visit SOP. So you can see that there's two sections. The first section is basically one about regulatory binders and one about the study product. And you can see that there's some items basically set up like checklist items signed that we're trying to ensure that signed protocol and protocol amendments are at the site, approved current informed consent templates, the approval documents, etc. So when we look at this, we can directly translate this into a trip report template within the system. So this slide basically shows that what we've done in the system is basically translate that SOP for each of the items that were study, document, regulatory binder related. We have converted those into checklist items, and each of those items that we mentioned and that were mentioned in that SOP are available here. And the specific questions that were designed as narratives, we've also included those in here as under drug device accountability. There's specific questions that are set up in our template here as well. During the live demo, we'll actually show you how this gets applied. So once you set this up, so if your SOPs are laid out in this fashion, you can easily translate that into a trip report template within the system. And then once that's set up, that's a global template for all of our studies and sites to use. And we'll look at in the live demo how that gets applied to the site visit. Another common challenge associated with trip reports is the need to have the report reflect a snapshot in time. This is easy to do with paper reports because we can generate a report and go back to it and look at what the current or the status of that particular site was at that time. But it becomes trickier when we're talking about electronic reports and records in a system, because all of those records are live in essence. So, for example, follow-up items. If we open a follow-up item and then we track it through closure, we're actually updating that record as we go along. So somehow we need to record and track the status of say follow-up items or protocol deviations without needing to recreate them for each new trip report. So we want to be able to capture the snapshot in the report, but also have the capability of managing and tracking those follow-up items through closure. So in Ascend, what we've done is we created areas outside of the trip report where you can track follow-up items, protocol deviations, serious adverse events, and CRF monitoring. And then within the trip report, we've created a way to import read-only copies of those records at specific times. So at any point when you're importing those records into the trip report, it's actually taking a copy and taking a snapshot of again, what is the current status of those records at that site. And again, this will become a little bit more clear once we jump into the demo. Another common challenge is the need to track the trip report as it moves through its review process. So again, with paper reports, it's easy to walk the report around from desk to desk for review, but it's trickier with electronic reports. So, excuse me. So what we've done in Siebel Clinical, or what Siebel Clinical gives us, is the capability of having a trip report status, which is governed by a state model. And what that means is we can actually have that status field, the access to that status field controlled based on which users are allowed to make certain changes. So for example, a monitor can take a trip report status from in progress to submitted, but that's the extent of their sort of role on changing status for trip reports. And then study managers can then take it from submitted to either rejected or approved. And once it's rejected, then the monitor has the capability of changing that status from rejected to, say, resubmitted, for example. So in Siebel Clinical, you have this workflow that can be tied to this status. In addition to that, in Ascend, what we've done is include a visible audit trail as well. So anytime a status of a trip report does change, we actually capture it in a visible audit trail, and not only in the audit trail in the back end, but we make it part of the trip report approval history in the trip report itself. So in the actual trip report, when you're printing it, that audit trail history of reviews and approvals is also attached directly to the trip report. And finally, the biggest challenge we've seen when it comes to electronic trip reports is how to ensure compliant approvals. So there are three primary ways of approving trip reports, or electronic trip reports, each with a varying degree of compliance risk. The first is printed reports with ink signatures. So even though you're using an electronic system, you can still generate a PDF or some sort of report, paper report, and then again route it for wet ink signatures and sort of get away from electronic approval. The second is re-authenticating for status changes. So anytime a status is changed within this electronic record, we ask or we require the user to re-authenticate themselves using their username and password. And the third is including a visible audit trail of status changes within the trip report. So that is, anytime the status does change, we basically create an audit trail record and put it into the approval history of that particular electronic record. So that'll give us a visible status history of that electronic record, how many times it's been submitted, how many times it was rejected and finally approved, and how long that took, and who made each of those specific status changes. So Ascend, out-of-the-box visit, the visible audit trail is available, and it's a less conservative interpretation than others, but some of our clients have determined that just that audit trail meets the requirements set forth by the 21 CFR Part 11 guideline. In this demo, though, what we're going to show you is what that audit trail looks like, as well as how re-authentication can work. So both of those functionalities together have been seen by virtually every one of our clients as fully meeting 21 CFR Part 11 compliance through system functionality. So now we're going to jump into the demo, and I'm going to share my application. Okay. And I'll try to go slow because I know there's a lag sometimes with this, with any sort of meeting platform that we're using. So I'll try to go allow for that lag. So what we're going to do, one second. Okay. What we're going to do is navigate to one of our sites and go through the whole process of monitoring and what a typical monitor would do before running your trip report, as well as after submitting it and the whole review and approval process. So I'm going to go to one of my sites. Within this site, I'm going to first look at just the records that I'm going to monitor. And like I mentioned before, in Ascend, what we've done is brought some of those features outside of the trip report so we can manage them. So it's like follow-up items, CRF tracking, adverse events, and protocol deviations. So we're going to look at all of those first as it pertains to this site. So under site management, I'm going to go into my follow-up items. And you'll notice that there are a few follow-up items in here. And what the trip report, this is basically an area for us to track any sort of follow-up items at any time. So these are not necessarily items that are only uncovered during a trip report, during a site visit. But at any point, if you identify an issue that you need to track, you can create a new follow-up item. And let's say it's let's do it a training one. So we have new site personnel that requires training. And so the status is open. We're going to say that we're going to give them a couple weeks to complete that and save that off. So we can enter some comments and say, there's a new nurse that requires study training. So this is a new follow-up item. If the follow-up items are open, they'll automatically show up on the trip report. But if I've closed one of these items, I have to select it to be part of the trip report. And the reason for that is if we have a series of closed items, we don't necessarily want them automatically to show up on the trip report because they might have been closed for quite some time. But if I've closed this regulatory binder missing, I'm going to close it and I'm going to select it for the trip report. So that's what I have to do to select anything that I've closed since the last time I created a site visit. Moving on, I'm going to go into our protocol deviations. Protocol deviations are set up in the system the same way, where they're related directly to the site. But we have an opportunity here to have different types of protocol deviations, either they're site-related or they're subject-related. You'll notice that so if I do a study procedure protocol deviation. So they deviated from study procedure. Just going to make it very generic. I don't have to select the screening ID. I can put in some dates of when we identified that, when it was identified by the monitor, identified by the site, any sort of actions required, and the status, and any sort of resolution or close date. So I can fill any of these fields out just to track that protocol deviation. And again, you can have site level protocol deviations or subject level. And if it's subject related, then you can actually select which subject on this particular site had that protocol deviation. Okay. Next is adverse events. Adverse events work pretty much the same way as protocol deviations. You have your, you have certain fields to track the overall description of it. The event type is either adverse event or serious adverse event, and then you have a series of dates of when they were, when the occurrence happened, when it was sent to safety, identified by the site, etc. One key note here is that for adverse events, the way to send is set up is that only your serious adverse events are what get pulled into the trip report. So this event type is important to indicate which ones are serious adverse events, therefore the ones that will get pulled into your trip report. And last but not least, we're going to look at our CRF tracking. So under CRF tracking, we have all of our completed and planned subject visits. So you can see the subject number, the visit name, visit type, and the number of CRF pages. So you can actually go through and let's say we've gotten all of these pages. So we got page 1 through 4, and they've been source verified. We've had source verified date today. They were retrieved today. And I'm going to select this one for trip report inclusion, and I'm also going to select this one as well. So both of the screening visits for both of these patients are going to be selected for the trip report. I'm not going to fill out all the information here, but this is basically what you need to do to select which ones have been monitored. So next, now that I've done my site management and my monitoring activities, I'm going to go into my site visit. So I'm going to go into my site visits. I'm just going to create one real quick, and this is going to be a routine monitoring. I'm going to select site monitoring, and then I'm going to click on my planned visit start date to take me into the trip report. So right off the bat, we see our site details, our visit details, trip report details at the top. We see our current enrollment statistics. They're blank. Everything is blank so far. We have a checklist item section. We have a question section, follow-up items, CRF, protocol deviations, and serious adverse events, and a trip report approval history that only has one record in it since I just created this site visit record. So we're going to walk through filling this out. So right off the bat, you see our site details that are already pre-populated. I've put in my monitoring visit information. I'm going to say the visit actually started today, and as soon as I put in a completed date, I want you guys to look at the current enrollment statistics. They'll automatically get populated based on, again, what is the current enrollment statistics at the time of this visit completion. So this automatically calculates that we have 3 screened and 2 enrolled patients, and none that have been early terminated or screen failed or completed, etc. I can add in my attendees. It automatically puts in my PI in here. And then the next, since I'm done with my visit, now I can go on to my trip report details. And this is where I select my template. So again, our SOPs have been translated into this template, and this is where you're going to see that being applied to this site visit. So I select my CR demo monitoring, and you'll notice that all of the checklist items are now populated, and our questions are populated as well. So if you remember, these are our checklist questions. So the response to these checklist questions is going to be a yes, no, not applicable, or not done. Very standard responses. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down this list, and I can mark off those checklist items. If there is a, again, you can do this systematically or from a process perspective. If an answer is no, then we have to put in some additional comments as to why that is no, why that hasn't been done. So I can go through this list and very easily just go through the checklist as defined in my SOP. Then for our questions, we are we're going to look at the response, and you'll notice that the response field is not a drop-down anymore. So this is actually, how would you describe the storage space and conditions of the study product? The storage space is adequate. So, I mean, it could be a very lengthy description. It could be a very detailed narrative for each of these questions. So our narrative response can be written in here. It's a free text field for us to be able to enter those questions in. So next, I'm going to go to the next section, which is import follow-up items. So you'll notice that there's no follow-up items in here right now, but I do have this button. And this button basically allows us to, again, import a snapshot of all the relevant follow-up items that belong on this trip report. So as soon as I click it, it'll pull in each of the ones that were open and the one that was closed that I had selected for inclusion on our trip report. Okay? So, and these are all read-only, so I can't change anything in this view. I go into my monitored CRF, and I import my CRF, and you'll notice, again, both of those screening visits for those two patients have been imported, and the relevant information that I added has been imported. And again, this is all read-only. Import my protocol deviations. All of them come through. It's a full log of your protocol deviations as it relates to the site. And then serious adverse events. Again, we had 3 records, but only one of them was a serious adverse event, so that gets pulled in. So now as a monitor, I've completed this trip report. So now I'm ready to submit it. So what we've done here is created some buttons to allow for that submission. So when I submit, we have an error message, a warning message saying, "Are you sure you want to change the status of this trip report?" Again, these are workflows that change certain functionality of the trip report, so we want to make sure that the user is wants to make that change. So we hit OK, and then it gives you another warning that this is an electronic signature, and it's a legally binding equivalent of physically signing a document. So it's just warning to basically make sure that the user knows that they're effectively signing this electronic record. They click OK, and then they're met with a username dialog. So I actually have to authenticate myself as the user. I'm going to click on Go, enter my name, enter my password. As soon as I enter that, then you can see that the trip report's status has been now changed to submitted. So as soon as I submit the trip report, you'll also notice that these import buttons are now no longer enabled. So, excuse me, one second. Apologize for that. the import buttons are disabled now, and so you can't change a trip report as a monitor once you've submitted it. And the other thing that has changed is if we look at this trip report approval history, you can see that at each point when we've changed statuses of this particular trip report, we've captured that approval history. So you can see that when it was from not started to in progress, and then from in progress to submitted, date and time stamp of when that occurred and who made that change. Okay. So now that we've approved this trip report, I'm going to come in as, I'm going to pretend I'm a manager now, and I'm going to review this trip report. Now, reviewing the trip report, for the questions and checklist items, it becomes a little bit easier. So we have these two views. One is manage, which is what the monitor used, and I'm going to go into this review trip report, which is where the manager would come in. So the manager sees the same information, site details, visit details, trip report details. We see our current enrollment statistics. But here in the trip report review list, we actually see the checklist items, the checklist questions, and the regular narrative questions in the same section. And that's because your SOPs basically bundle anything that's a narrative question versus a checklist question together. So this is a way to be able to see all of that together. So you can see anything that has a yes or no response, or you have questions that have a narrative response. So all of this can be seen together and reviewed together. And what the reviewer is going to do is we have comments that the monitor can enter, but we have reviewer comments that the manager or the reviewer can enter. So reviewer comments are important because it facilitates this back and forth for tracking that approval process and communicating what needs to be changed potentially before approval. But it doesn't show up on the printed version of the trip report. Reviewer comments are just to facilitate this back and forth from the submitter and the approver. So we have reviewer comments on each of the questions that are in this section, as well as a reviewer comments at the highest level. So if a manager wants to say that there's specific things that need to be changed on the trip report before they approve it, they can enter that in here. So under reviewer comments, I'm actually going to put some information and say we need additional details on follow-up items that are open. So very generic, but you can imagine you can put it as much detail and direction as you would like in these reviewer comments, both at the highest level as well as on this individual question level. So once you put those reviewer comments in, I'm actually going to reject this trip report as a manager. So if I'm rejecting, again, I get this, are you sure you want to reject it? I hit OK. Rejection, the way that we have it configured, doesn't require re-authentication. You're not actually signing a document by doing a rejection. The only time that you're required to do that is when you submit or when you approve. So now this trip report is now rejected. If I come back in here, again, if I come back in here as a monitor, I can see that the trip report status is rejected, and I can see why it's been rejected. I can look at the reviewer comments and see what I need to do. Additional details on the follow-up items that are open. Okay. If I go down to my follow-up items and other areas, you'll notice that the import function is now still enabled again, but I can't make any changes directly in here. I have to go back into my site follow-up items to make any changes. So what I'm going to do is go back to my site, go back to my follow-up items, and that new one that we created, I'm going to update it. So I'm going to put in some additional details, but I'm just going to put in some updated text. And now that I've updated it, I can go back into my trip report. Now that I'm back in my trip report, you'll notice that that updated text is not here. So again, this is very clearly demonstrating that this is a snapshot in time, right? So even though those follow-up items have been updated, maybe closed out, or additional details have been added, what remains in my trip report is what I took as a snapshot last time I imported it. So to update this follow-up item or CRF or anything else that I've changed, what I have to do is click on this Import Follow-up Item button again. And as soon as I click on that, you'll notice that, again, we took another snapshot of all of our follow-up items that have been entered at the site level. And it meets that. It also looks at the criteria of those records. So if I've removed, and just to illustrate that, if I go back in here and go into my follow-up items, and I don't select this closed item for selection in my trip report, if I go back into my site visit, again, that item will still show up because we haven't taken another snapshot. And if I take another snapshot, it'll remove the one that I didn't select or removed from selection for the trip report. So this is the way that a monitor would update their trip report based on what the reviewer had communicated what needs to be updated, and then I'll come back in here and resubmit it. And again, I get the same warnings, that I'm electronically signing, and I'm re-authenticating the user again, and it's authenticated. It's now the trip report status is resubmitted. So again, when you look at your trip report approval history, you can you'll always be able to see when was the initial submission versus when how many times it was rejected, and then when it was resubmitted, and then finally approved. So if we end up rejecting this report several times, and I'm actually going to do that. If I come back in here and reject it, and I'm just going to go through, and resubmit it. And then finally, we'll approve it. And again, for approval, we get the same error messages and warning messages that we're actually signing this document. And it will then require me to enter my username and, that's a good error. So the other function that we put in here, the other functionality, is that the approver user, the approving user cannot be the same as the person who last submitted the trip report. So that's an important feature that we put in, considering all of our clients wanted that functionality. So from a demo perspective, I can't actually show you that approval. But what I can show you is from the audit trail history. Again, you can see as many times as it's gotten rejected and resubmitted, how long that took, and where the issues are with trip report approvals within your system. And the other things that we've added, again, just to capture certain metrics around your trip report, is since we're capturing when the visit is complete, when the trip report was initially submitted, and when the trip report is finally approved, we actually, back at this level, we're actually capturing certain turnaround times as well. So, I mean, right now all of the turnaround times are going to be 0 because I've done everything in one day. But there are 3 different turnarounds that we're looking at. There is a submission turnaround, which is the dates between, or the number of days between when the visit was complete to the initial submission of the trip report. We have an approval turnaround, which is the number of days from initial submission to final approval. And then the total turnaround is from site visit complete to trip report approval. So if you have some internal goals or guidelines on, the trip report must be submitted within 2 weeks of visit complete, and the trip report must be approved within 4 weeks or 3 weeks of visit complete, then this is a way for you to capture those metrics and actually look at those outliers of where we've gone over our internal goals for trip report approval. And as soon as you identify those, you can always go into that trip report and go into the approval history and very easily see what caused that delay. So maybe it was submitted and it was sitting in a manager's inbox for a week before it got any attention, or maybe it took longer for the monitors to submit it, or there were quite a few iterations between rejection and submission and approval. So you can based on those metrics, you can actually go into the details and find out what actually occurred on that specific trip report, and narrow down why there was a delay. So you can really track the progress of your organization's progress in this area. Jump back into our platform here and look at our questions. Let me see here. So one of the questions was, are there character limits in any of those fields? In the text fields in the follow-up views, the character length is, right now it's set up as, I think, about 500 characters. So a lot of the description and comment fields are quite long. But for those of you that know Siebel, that any fields that we want to extend or make larger, we can do that very easily with configuration. But we've done our part in this end to make sure that description and comment fields are quite lengthy. And also in some of those fields, we've also included spell check on a lot of those description and comment fields as well. Okay. There was a question, is there any way to link this to Oracle's RDC system? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We've actually done that for a number of clients and linked it to a variety of systems, Oracle, OC and RDC being one of them. December 2010, our webinar actually talked specifically to that question. So we presented on OC RDC integration with Siebel Clinical. Okay. What was one of the questions was, what was the criteria for the CRS to show up on the trip report? So in its send out of the box, what we've done is put in certain flags. So the monitor who's filling out the trip report will actually have to select which CRS they've monitored and select those for inclusion in the trip report. So it's a check flag that allows us to import those selected items and records directly into the trip report. But we do have some clients that have taken and added some additional functionality, so they didn't want to rely on a check flag, so they came up with some some other criteria that was a little bit more systematic. So you can do that. Each client would have to, we would have to come up with some criteria that makes sense. And if it's integrated with an OCRDC system, then there's there's certainly ways to be able to systematically select the CRF records that were recently updated. After anything that was updated or created after the last site visit, for example. So that's some of the criteria that our clients have used in the past for not only CRF records, but protocol deviation records, SAE records, anything that has been updated or created since the last time since our last site visit report can be automatically imported. Another question for the submission turnaround metric, are you using the initial submission date or last submission? We're using the initial submission date. So that's why we had two different statuses. One was submitted and the second one was resubmitted. So after rejection, we actually create the status of resubmitted, so it's clear where the initial submission was and when the last submission, or what the latest submission was. So our turnaround metric is related directly to the initial submission date. Another question here is, are trip reports submitted to the sites? And if so, is there a way of tracking that as a status? Trip reports submitted to the site. I'm not exactly sure what that means if we submit the trip reports to the sites directly. But certainly the process, if there's interim statuses that are related directly to a different kind of submission, if it's submitted to a site for review before submitted to a manager, you can certainly add in Siebel, you can certainly add submission status values to that list. We would just have to define it and potentially, since we've created buttons for submissions and approvals, if there was a different type of status that we wanted to carry the trip report to, we would have to create a button to account for that as well. Another question is, can you search across trip reports on a particular topic? So I'm going to share my application again and show where we can search across trip reports. So I'm going to go into, there's a site visits view, and you can actually, if you give your users the ability to do this, you can actually search across all site visits that have ever been entered or created within the system. And again, this is where you would go to query on trip report approval, turnaround, submission turnaround. So anything that was greater than 2 weeks, for example, would then show up here, and you could fine-tune your query. But this is where you would go to search across all site visits across the application. So if there are particular types of site visits or a date range, or just looking at any and all trip reports that are currently at the status of rejected, for example, that's something that you can do at this level. So I hope that answers that question. I'm not sure what you meant by trip reports of a certain topic, but this is where you would go to search across any attribute that we have for any site visit in the system. Okay. So the next question, when a report is submitted and reviewed for a manager, is there an ability to notify the manager via an email? Absolutely. So we've actually set that up for a number of our clients as well. So when you set up the system and you set up your site team, for example, you can actually indicate who's your study manager or who's going to be reviewing and approving the trip reports. And email is attached, or email is one of the attributes for each of your internal site teams. So the monitor and your manager approval and your manager will all have emails attached to them, or email addresses attached to them, and we can configure the system via workflow. So as soon as you click on that submit button, not only does it walk you through that, changing that status to submit, but it would also, at the tail end of that, after it changes that status, could send an email directly to the manager that needs to approve that trip report. And the manager would get an email saying that this site's site monitoring report is now ready for approval, or review and approval. And similarly, if they reject that particular site visit, or that site visit report, if the manager rejects it, we've also sent an email automatically to the submitter of that trip report. So something that they've submitted has now been rejected, so it requires an action on their part as well. So we've definitely done that via email through the workflow feature. In addition to that, again, I'm going to share my application again. In addition to that, what we've done in the system is actually route anything that requires action from a trip report perspective directly to the home page. So we have programs, protocols, and sites. We also have my trip reports. So if there's a trip report, and let me actually reject one. So then we have one that shows up there. So any trip report that's assigned to me that has let's say a rejected status, or any status that requires some sort of action on their part, so anything that's not approved, would show up on the home page. So now that this one is rejected, I should see it on my home page in my trip report. So you'll see that my trip reports will show me anything that's in progress, not started, or submitted, or rejected. So each of those statuses will show up here. Once it's approved, it'll remove itself from this list. So this is just a feature that we added to, again, route anything that requires action directly to the home page. So as soon as I log in, I can see that there's something waiting for me. But you can certainly do, email notifications as well. Another question that we have is, can we have a manager approve and then sponsor approval? So we've dealt with that before as well. So different levels of approval. So it could be 2 levels of internal approval, or a manager approval and then a sponsor approval. So we've done that as well. Basically what you have to do is again, add statuses into the application for trip reports. So right now we just have an approved status, but we would change that to say, manager approval, or internal approval, and then final approval, or something like that. And then for each of those statuses, if we wanted to utilize that electronic signature capability and re-authentication, we would have to create a button for each level of those approvals. So then, we would have the user authenticate themselves at each level of approval, and then each of those would be captured in that audit trail approval history as well. Okay. That's the last question that I have on our chat. Just wanted to see if there are any other last questions before we wrap it up. Great. So great. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope it was time well spent. Like I mentioned before, we do have additional webinars planned for July, August, and September. In July, we're going to be discussing the integration between a CTMS, Siebel Clinical, and a Electronic Document Management System, or EDMS. So that webinar is also going to include a live demonstration how that type of integration can work. So we've created a prototype, and we'll do a live demonstration of that. In August, we'll be covering top 10 reasons why you need a CTMS. So this webinar is looking to help organizations who are working on a CTMS business case put together a compelling argument. And in September, we'll be looking at Siebel Clinical from a job function perspective. So for example, if you're a clinical finance person, how could Siebel Clinical help you do your job? In October, however, we are going to take a break from the webinars because we're going to be attending the OSUG annual conference in Toronto, and we're going to be presenting a few sessions there as well, and we hope to see you all there. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, today's presentation is going to be available for download from our website within 24 hours. If you do have any additional questions specifically to this topic, or you'd like to discuss your organization's needs to determine the best option for you around trip reports, feel free to contact me directly. My email address is on the screen. Again, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.